Well, hey, before we jump in today, let me just kind of echo what you've already heard about next week as we start our brand new series called I Quit. I know what you know, and that there are some things in life that are worth quitting. And the reason they're worth quitting is because, what you've discovered and what I've discovered, what so many of us discover, is if we continue to walk down those paths, they inevitably end up with regret. And none of us want to get to the end of our days and look back on a regretful life. And so, man, I think this series is going to be incredibly impactful and meaningful as we look at, here's a few core things in our life that we need to quit in order to experience all that God has for us. And so, man, I hope you'll be here. I hope, you'll take advantage of inviting someone. Anytime we start a brand new series, I think it's just a great time to bring someone with you. And so take this card this weekend, bring someone with you next weekend. Now, today we are wrapping up our series called Remarkable. And so it's been so much fun over the last few weeks just to be hearing the stories about the impact that this series and this content has had on you, whether it's been through our social media sites and the things you've been talking about or the emails you've been sending in or conversations we've been having with you. It's been incredible to hear what God's been stirring up in your hearts over the last couple of weeks. And the whole sort of idea and premise of this series is that we all want a remarkable life. Like, it's in us. We long for that. And so how do you get there? And so one of the things we've been doing, we like to make things simple here, so we've kind of put out this real simple equation that we've been going by, saying if you want remarkable, kind of here's the path towards it. And the first week we said, man, remarkable starts with sort of reorienting our perspective towards God and saying, I'm going to live a God-first life in a me-first world. That's where it starts. And then we talked about finding your tribe. That it is almost impossible and it is extraordinarily difficult to walk towards remarkable when you aren't surrounded by a tribe of people who want the same thing that you want. So find a tribe of people who are pursuing God's best for their life. And then last week we talked about this idea of action, to take what God's given us and to use it to serve others. And we said if you do that enough, if you make small choices in these areas, you make a ton of small choices over time, if you keep doing that it will lead to remarkable. Now, by the way, I had a friend, he's way smarter than me, and he came up to me a couple weeks ago and said, Jason, I just got to tell you something because it has been bugging me. This is division. And because this is division, that R should be a small r, not a big R. Whatever, Matt Mead. Come on, man. Take your math stuff somewhere else, man. We're going to stick with the big R because that's what we want. We're big R people here, right? And so listen, this whole series, what it's really been about is this. It's really been a series about meaning, purpose, finding deeper value for our life, finding a sense of, tapping into the deeper sense of meaning and purpose for our life. That's really what it's been about. I'm always amazed at how sort of intrinsic to the human spirit this desire and this longing for meaning and purpose is. It's like we can't escape it. We wake up with a sense of hope for the day. We wake up believing that today or maybe tomorrow could be better than the past. We're driven by this. In fact, even this last week, I've had a couple of conversations, and I didn't ask for it, and they were completely unrelated conversations. I wasn't fishing for anything. On their own, they brought up this idea that there's this place in their life, and they're sitting there asking these questions going, man, how do I create as much value at this point in my life as I could possibly create for others? Why do we think about things like this? What is it in us that drives us to use words like best and great when we talk about our aspirations for life, that we want the best marriage we can have, that we want to be a great father? Why do we use words like this? Because there's something in us that's designed for remarkable. There's something in us that's driven to wanting something more deep, meaningful, and purposeful. And we're the only species on earth that does this. No other species on earth does this. When's the last time you saw a group of squirrels sitting around contemplating their existence? My dog Levi is not planning a 2-day retreat so he can go and script out the next 10 years of his life so he has more meaning. We are driven by it, though. It's almost like there's something in the human spirit that will not allow us to settle. It's just in us. We want purpose, we want meaning. But here's the problem, and it's a big one. We oftentimes ask the wrong questions to try to discover purpose. In fact, there's a question that probably so many of you have asked, and you may not have articulated like this. It might not be the exact words, but it's sort of the fundamental basis of it. It's just this: what am I here for? That we want to know, what am I here for? What am I on this earth for? What am I here for? And it might be just, contextual. It might be your job. What am I here in this job for? What am I here in this community for? What am I here for? That's a question fueled and sort of intended to lead us towards what's my purpose? What's my meaning? The problem is, I don't think this is the best question to ask. I think it's a good question. I think there's some good parts to it. I just think the question's limited in where it can lead us. I think it's limited in where it can lead us towards discovering more purpose and meaning for life. And the reason why, there's two reasons why I think this question is limited. First of all, sort of implicit to this question, what am I here for, is that there is a one singular what that you need to discover. In other words, that there's a sense that I've got to find the one what for my life. And so many of us live with this undercurrent of anxiety that we haven't truly discovered what we are here for. We haven't discovered the one true what for our lives yet. And there's always this anxiety that maybe, I'm happy with what I'm doing. I'm content with where I'm at, but maybe this isn't all there is. And so we're always like, is there more? Is there something more? The other reason why I think this question is limited is because this question is typically based on circumstances. It's very circumstantial. And when the circumstances shift in our life, we find ourselves asking this question again. In other words, you may be in a job that you feel very content with. You may be in a place in your life with relationships that you feel very content with. And then all of a sudden the circumstances shift. You lose that sense of contentment and you find yourself asking this question again. The problem with that is that it leads us to believing a lie. And the lie that we believe is that if I just change my circumstances, I'll discover the answer to this. But it doesn't work. So we leave our current job and we go find another job, or we start to travel, or we leave our relationships, or maybe we leave our spouse, believing if we just leave those circumstances that we'll find more fulfillment, that it'll lead us to this. And yet, what so many of us have discovered is that we change circumstances, but after a time, this aching question still keeps coming back. And that's because I don't think that's the best question. I think a better question, I just want to kind of offer you a suggestion of what I think is a better question, and it really is just a subtle little nuance to this question, but man, it has profound implications, and it's just replacing this word what with who. Who am I here for? That's a perspective shift. Who am I here for? And maybe if we begin with the perspective of saying, man, who am I here for right now in life? Who am I here for in my neighborhood? Who am I here for in my place of work? Who am I here for? That if we begin to tap into that and begin to orient our life around that, that might unlock the what we are here for. Who I've been placed around to make an impact on. Who I've been placed around to serve, to leverage what I do for them. And that may unlock the what. The problem is so many of us, we've discovered this. Some of us have seen people who reverse those two. Some of us have seen people who they pursued the what they are here for at the expense of who they are here for. You've seen this. Some of you know people that they in their relentless pursuit of what they are here for, they left the who's in their life behind. They left their family abandoned. They left their friends on the sidelines in their pursuit of what they're here for. They left the who's behind. Maybe worse, some of you, you've seen people that in the relentless pursuit of their what, they used the who's in their life to advance them. And so all the who's around them, all the people around them just become pawns in their game to discover their own what, and it's damaging. I mean, it's a game changer when you change your perspective, you start with who. Now, I happen to think this is just a great reframing question for discovering more meaning and purpose in your life. I think this is just a great sort of reframing question. You don't have to be religious. You can be non-religious. You don't have to believe the Bible or anything like that. And if you begin to wake up every day and you begin to sort of say, who am I here for? I promise you, you'll get to the end of the day, you'll get in bed at night, and if you put this on your refrigerator or put this in your car somewhere and you go, who am I here for to help today? Who am I here for to serve today and all that? You will get in bed at night feeling more fulfilled. I just think that's a better way to live. So you can take it for that. But if you're here and you're a Christian, if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, part of what you signed up for when you became a Christian was this question. Part of what you signed up for when you became a Christian was actually begin to orient your life around answering this. Because part of what you believe is that part of that God's fundamental posture towards the world is that he has a heart for others, for people. In fact, this is part of what you believe to be most true about God and how he relates to the world. So I just want to unpack that a little bit. I want to unpack that idea and what that would look like and what implications that would have for our life as we march towards remarkable. Because I think the path towards remarkable starts not by asking, what am I here for? It starts by asking, who am I here for? And there's one passage in particular that I want to look at with you today. And this passage it's deeply meaningful to me because this passage, a couple of decades ago when I made a decision to give my life completely just surrender, man, I'm going to follow you, Jesus, with all that I have. This passage grabbed a hold of my heart, and I promise you, it has not let go in the couple decades since. It still today just has such a hold on my heart because it infused a sense of mission and meaning and purpose into my life that I never experienced. My hope is it can do that for you as well. It's written by a guy named Paul. And Paul was a leader in the early church. He was one of the very first he was one of the very first leaders in the church. And so Paul, what's kind of crazy is Paul wrote a bunch of letters to these followers of Jesus who were living in cities all across the Roman Empire in the first century. What's crazy is 2,000 years later, I mean, think about this, 2,000 years later, we still have copies of those letters. We can still read what they were thinking about, what they were wrestling with, and what they were talking about. And Paul writes this letter to this group of Christians living in the city of Corinth in the first century. And this is what he says. This is in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. This is how he starts this little passage. He says, Christ's love controls us. Christ's love controls us. Some translations here say Christ's love compels us, or some translations, Christ's love urges us on. The idea is Paul saying, man, I have an energizing force in the morning when I wake up. I have a motivating force. I have a reason to get up in the morning, and it's not just breakfast. He's saying there's something way deeper. He's saying Christ's love compels us. Now, part of what is remarkable about this statement, is not just what Paul says, it's who said it. What makes this statement truly remarkable is that Paul said these words, that Paul wrote these words. And the reason why is because some of you may not know this, but just a few years before Paul wrote these words, Paul was not only skeptical of Christians, he wasn't just antagonistic towards Christians. Paul wasn't just hesitant to be around Christians. Paul was a part of a group that felt their livelihood, their way of life, and everything about them was so threatened by Christians that Paul was sent out and tasked with the responsibility to arrest them and in some cases execute them. Now, my guess is some of you are here today and you're a bit skeptical of Christians as well, and you're here and you're checking things out, and maybe you came, this is your first time here, maybe you've been coming out, and you don't know where you land on this because you saw a bunch of Christians when you were growing up who were hypocritical and you kind of gave up on the whole thing, and you've got your reasons. I get that. I understand. You're skeptical too and you're hesitant. But my guess is you've never killed one of us. Thank you, by the way. But Paul did, and he was proud of it at the time. And then the person who was killing Christians becomes one. Why? Because he had an undeniable encounter with the resurrected Jesus. And he couldn't explain it. He couldn't answer all the questions about it. He just knew, I am changed. I met Jesus. He met Jesus. And he was transfixed and transformed by this love that was poured out. His heart was completely overwhelmed by the love of God demonstrated in Jesus Christ. He says, Christ's love controls us. He's like, I've been overtaken by this. It's no longer for Paul, hate controls me. It's no longer bigotry controls me. It's no longer resentment controls me. He's controlled by Christ's love now. And not only does Paul know that that love is for him personally, he comes to believe what all these first Christians come to believe is that this love is for everyone. In fact, look what he says next. He says this. He says, he died for everyone. Who? Jesus. Jesus died for who? Everyone. So that those who receive his new life will no longer live for themselves. He can change you. He can transform you too. Instead, they will live for Christ, who died and was raised for them. Who's them? Everyone. Now, I don't know what it was like, when they first were reading this letter. I'd imagine, they're sitting around a living room in Corinth. The light's probably pretty dim. They got about 20 or so people around. They're reading this letter that just came in the mail, that morning, and so they're reading this thing. And I don't know if someone was courageous enough at this point to raise their hand, but someone in that little room may have felt what some of you feel when you read a statement like this. Hey, real quick. Paul doesn't mean everyone, does he? I get it. He kind of has to say that, but not really everyone, right? Certainly not the ones who are in prison for doing those things. Not those everyone, right? And certainly not the people who've done that in my life. And certainly not that group of people. Not everyone. And Paul's saying, no. Everyone. Christ died for everyone, out of love for them. Let me ask you a question. Are you okay with that? And I don't mean philosophically. I don't mean in theory. I don't mean put that on a bumper sticker, God loves everyone. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about practically in your life, the nitty-gritty of your life. Are you okay with that? Think about the person that you least want that to be true about. Because it's true about them too. Christ's love compelled him to die for them. Think about the group of people that you least want that to be true about. Because it's true for them too. See, I think foundational to this, what Paul is building here, this case for beginning to open our eyes, saying, God, who am I here for? Is this understanding that everyone you have ever locked eyes with, guys, listen, everyone you have ever locked eyes with is the unique object of God's relentless love. So much so that God said they are worthy of my life. Jesus said they are worthy to die for. That's how far God's love for everyone pushed him. And Paul is saying, man, when we come into a transformative encounter with Jesus, when we respond to Jesus in this way, it not only changes the way we see ourselves, but it will fundamentally alter and change the way we see everyone else around us. This is why Paul says this in the very next sentence. He says, so we've stopped evaluating others from a human point of view. Like in light of what Jesus Christ has done for everyone, in light of the love of God displayed for everyone, we've stopped evaluating others from a human point of view. We don't judge books by their cover anymore. At one point, we thought of Christ the same way. We thought of him from a merely human point of view. How differently we know him now. Paul was saying, we made that mistake once. We made that mistake with Jesus. We thought he was just this. He turned out to be so much greater than we ever imagined. Paul says, I'm not making that mistake again with everyone else. Because it changes the way we see people. It's almost like Paul is saying, at one point, I saw others from a human point of view. At one point, I thought that they were just my employees. That's how I used to see them. They were just my employees. They were just my family. At one point, that's how I used to see them. They were just my family. At one point, I used to see them like they were just my neighbors. That's who they were. They were just my neighbors. They were just the person who checks me out every single morning at Wawa. They were just my classmates. They were just my teammates. They were just my teachers. They were just my students at one point. That's how I used to see them. They were just a pest. They were just an annoyance. They were just my rival. That's how I used to see them, but not anymore. Not anymore. I don't look at them from a human point of view anymore because my heart has been changed in the way that it sees people in light of the love of God for everyone. Guys, just lean in for a second because I want you to hear this. So I want you to hear this. When you choose to give your heart to God, you are simultaneously at the exact same moment, you are choosing to open your heart to everyone else around you in love. Your choice to give your heart to God is a choice to open yourself in love to everyone else. Those two cannot be separated. They are one and the same. And we stop seeing people like we used to see them. Our perspective has changed. Now, we could stop here, and we'd have enough to talk about for about a year, just in how we see people, just in sort of changing our perspective. We would have enough, because as if seeing people the way God sees them isn't challenging enough, Paul actually pushes further. He doesn't stop here. In other words, Paul doesn't say, I just want you to see people different. Don't worry about how you treat them. Don't worry about anything else. I just want you to see people different. Paul doesn't stop there. Paul says there's a reason why we have to begin to see people different. There's a reason, and the reason is because God is doing something in this world, that God wants something for those very people. And God has a mission in this world, and he wants to use you in that mission. Look what he says just a few verses later. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. You know what reconciling means? Reconciling just means when, sort of the most basic level, it just means when something is torn apart, when something is separated. To reconcile, it means you bring it back together again. That's what it means to be reconciled. It's brought back together again. Paul's saying, man, there is a world that has been separated from God, and God wants to reconcile this world, and he's given us this task of bringing people back to God, that God is making his appeal through us. You want to talk about mission? You want to talk about a deeper purpose for your life? You want to talk about meaning? And this is it. Because do you know what this means? Guys, God has a heart that bleeds for your family. God has a heart of love that bleeds for your family. God has a heart that bleeds for your school, your teammates. God has a heart that bleeds for your coworkers. God has a heart of love that bleeds for the people in your fraternity and your sorority. God has a heart that bleeds for your neighbors. And he has uniquely positioned you to reveal that heart to them. You're it. He has uniquely positioned you. Now, I realize for some of you, that freaks you out because you know you. And you know your struggles, and you know your past, and you know how overwhelming that feels a little bit. For some of you, you're sitting there going, man, I wish Paul wouldn't have said that. Maybe what Paul really meant was, and God has given pastors this task. But that's not what he said. And for those of you, my friends who grew up Catholic, some of you are like, I thought God has given the Pope this task of reconciling. Not what he says. Some of you are like, and God has given the super spiritual. That's not what he says. Paul says, God has given us, you, me, together, us. He's given us this task, that he is making his appeal to this world through us, you, that he's uniquely positioned you where you are. And if he has done that, if he has given us this incredible mission and task, you can guarantee he has also at the same time given you everything you need to step into that mission. He will empower you. He will give you the strength you need. He will give you everything you need. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have it all figured out to step into a greater mission that God is inviting you into, to reveal his heart to the world. This is a game changer, guys, for how we see our lives. It's a game changer for how we see our lives. Because that means that if you are here and you lead a company, you know what this means? If you're here and you lead a company, the reason you lead a company is not just to lead a company. If this is true, you lead a company ultimately to do that. And if you're a stay-at-home mom, you are a stay-at-home mom to do that ultimately. And if you're a barista, you are a barista to do that. If you're a teacher, you're a teacher to do that. And if you're in school to do that. In other words, that every role you have in your life is simply one big giant excuse to do the real thing. To get on with the real mission. To advance God's heart in this world for others. This is why Paul says that you are an ambassador. You know what an ambassador is? An ambassador is a representative. It's a representative for their leader. That a leader sends out an ambassador, and a leader sends out a representative to speak for them, to represent them in the world. Paul says, that's you. You have been sent out as a representative into this world. That is so empowering. Because do you know what that is saying? That is saying that God trusts you. He trusts you with that task. He trusts you with that. And he's given you such greater mission. Do you want to live remarkable? To step into that, it starts not by saying, just by simply stopping at what am I here for? It starts maybe by saying, God, who am I here for to advance your mission in this world? Because you have been uniquely designed to live as his representative. And if you want to do that, let me just give you two real practical handles. If you want to step into that remarkable sense of greater mission and meaning and purpose for your life, I say, man, God, who am I here for? Let me just give you 2 questions that I think are really helpful in beginning to know how God has uniquely designed you to advance the mission. Because I think you ought to take inventory of these 2 questions. Here they are. What are my strengths and what are my stories? What are my strengths? What are my stories? You need to answer that for your life, because if you get the answer to that, it begins to unpack how God's designed you and leveraged you and wants to leverage you to advance the mission. What are my strengths? What are you good at? You can write them down if you want. What are you good at? What are your strengths? Are you good at, is it organizing things? Excel spreadsheets, right? Just you put order to things. Is it creating environments? Is it welcoming? Is it communicating? Is it singing? Is it leading people forward? What are you good at? What are the things that you do that when other people do them, they're like, man, that's exhausting. I don't know how you do that with your life, and yet it doesn't exhaust you at all. In fact, it energizes you. Pay attention to those things because you're probably really strong at those. What do people come to you for advice for? What do people come to you as if you're the expert? Pay attention to that because it probably means you're really strong at that. What are your strengths? What is it that you're good at? What task? Because when we begin to tap into that, we begin to realize that all of those have been given to us to be leveraged to point people to God, to reveal His heart for the world. That you don't have to shelf those to live in mission for God. God's not asking for you to shelf your strengths. God's saying, no, bring your strengths with you. I need your strengths. Because I have something for this world that I want to use you for. And when I first started here at the church, I was in student ministry. Some of the most rich years of my life were those years in student ministry. And I remember one time, years ago, one of our students, Maddie, she brought a friend with her for the very first time to church. And after our gathering was done, Maddie and her friend wanted to talk. And so her friend, who was the first time in the church, her friend said, man, I want to know more about what it means to follow Jesus. I want to know more. I want to know what this means. And so we talked about that. And at the end of us talking, Maddie prayed for her friend. And I'll never forget the way Maddie prayed for her friend, because her friend was such a good singer. Her friend had an excellent voice. Her friend was a great singer. And in the middle of Maddie's praying, and I went home and I wrote this down because I was so struck by it. Maddie prayed, she said, God, may all her songs be for you now. In other words, don't stop singing. You're strong at that. But now you can take that and leverage it for something so much greater. What are your strengths? How do you leverage those to point people to the heart of God, to reconcile them, bring them back to God? But not only what are your strengths, what are your stories? What are your stories? What are the experiences that you have had in your life that are unique to you, that if you were to share those stories and experiences will give you a connection with others who share the same story, who need to hear that they're not alone? Where's your pain? What pain have you gone through in your life that is part of your story that needs to be shared, that can connect with someone else in order to connect them to the heart of God? What are your joys? What are your sorrows? What are your struggles? What are your victories? All of these make up your story and need to be shared. There is nothing random about the story of your life. There are no coincidences about the experiences that you have experienced. God has uniquely woven together the story of your life so that you can connect with people that others might not be able to connect with because you share their story. Nothing is an accident. About a year ago, Jenny and I had just found out that we were pregnant, and it was a total surprise to us. And so we were beginning to share with people that we were pregnant. And so one day I was talking with my friend Josh and then Scott Federoff. And I was telling them the story, sharing the news that we were pregnant. And I'm sitting there with Scott, and I'm making all these jokes because I'm too old to have a baby. And I know that. And so I'm talking about, I'm going to be the guy in like the walker at the high school graduation. I'm making all these jokes, whatever, right? So then I get home that night, and Scott sent me a text message. And I've held on to this. I'll show you what he texted me. He said, Jace, thanks for letting me listen in as you told Josh your pregnancy story. I was really blessed by how God is working in your life and what he's doing to ensure that you have credibility to relate to young families for a longer season. Cool stuff. And then he said, and thanks for rescuing me from using the wrong name through the whole prayer. So earlier in the day, by the way, Scott and I were praying with a group of people, and Scott just launches into this prayer, and he's like, God, man, we just pray for Stuart, and we ask that Stuart would just be blessed. And God, we just pray that the Stuart would know that you're in his life. And finally, I interrupt the prayer. I just wake up and I go, hey, Scott, dude, his name is Jordan. But some dude named Stuart got blessed beyond measure. Some dude in Nebraska named Stuart's like, man, where's all this coming from, man? I've held on to this text for several reasons. But one of them is to be reminded of what it looks like to see every part of my story as an opportunity to be leveraged for the mission. Because when Scott said, I love that God is working in what he is doing to ensure you have credibility, man, you've got 18 more years now. Isn't that incredible to be relevant to families? That is a mission perspective. That is there are no accidents in what God has called us to step into perspective. That is a who am I here for perspective. And I think you could sum this up by just asking a real simple question, because I think this may be the most important question that we can ask in light of this. What is the most strategic way I can use my strengths and stories to advance the mission of God in this world? What is the most strategic way? Can you imagine, by the way, how different your day would be if you just asked this? How different our lives would be if this were like put like a sticky note on our forehead and we just lived every day with this? What is the most strategic way today that I can use my strengths and my stories to advance the mission of God in this world? I promise if you ask this, if you seek God in this, you will discover more meaning and purpose for your life than you have ever experienced. And the truth is, and I want to tell some of you this, and I hope this frees some of you, you do not need to leave your job to go find your mission. You do not need to leave your circumstances to go find your mission. What we may need more than anything else is to open ourselves up and to say, God, I'm not going to leave where I'm at to go find mission. God, I'm opening myself up and asking you to breathe mission into where I'm at. I want you to breathe mission into where I currently am. To use me. To use my strengths and stories where I'm at. For your greater purpose in this world. To reconcile people back to you. And the quickest way to discover that will be by asking, who am I here for? Not what. And then to go from here. And to live in mission with God. I want you to know as a church, we are committed to helping this happen. We're committed to coming alongside you and helping you live in mission. And one of the ways I think that we're trying to do that as best as we can is to just keep things really simple here. Every now and then, we'll have people ask us like, man, why don't we do stuff? We could do stuff every night of the week at the different, at all of our locations. We could have our building full every single night of the week. And what would happen if we did that? So we could do a ton of programs. We could do a ton of studies. We could do a ton of classes. And what would happen is we would all be here at the church and none of us would be out there as representatives. And that's the point. Not just what happens here. And so as a church, we're committed to being simple. We're committed to not doing a ton of things so that we can leave here and to go to live in mission. So we can leave here and reconcile people to God in the places that He's put us. We are a sent people. And everything we do here at our church is for the reason ultimately of sending us back out to live in our communities, to be neighbors, to love, and to point people to God. And wouldn't it be remarkable? Man, I can't think of anything more remarkable than if one day, because you committed to that, to leaving, to going, to saying, who am I here for? That one day maybe you would get to hear someone tell their story of faith. You would get to hear someone, and when they shared their faith story, and when they talked about how they were once separated from God, but they were reconciled, they came back to God. When they shared their story of faith, of how that all happened, they talk about you. They mention your name because you invested in them, because you served beside them, because you spent time in conversation with them, because you passed them a book that you thought would help, because you prayed for them, because you invited them to church, because you listened to their 1,000th question time and time again with patience and love, because of you. And that's worth giving your life for. That's your deepest meaning and mission, purpose. And one of the things that gets me so fired up about our church is that so many of you are tapping into that. So many of you are saying, God, I want to live with deeper and greater mission right here where I'm at, and allowing God to infuse mission where you are. We've been telling stories throughout this series of men and women that we just think are remarkable, people here at our church. And so I just want to tell you we want you to see one last story. And it's Chris's story. Chris's story is one where he said, God, who am I here for? Use me. Let me see where it takes you. Let me see where it takes me, God, as I live in mission with you. Take a look at the screens.
Oh, hey, did you guys pray? Okay, why don't you
We all live busy lives, and that is no different for Chris and Melissa Telesco. Chris and Melissa have attended LCBC for the past 12 years and are currently serving at the Lancaster City campus. They're raising 4 adopted children, and Chris works as a teacher at the Penn Manor Middle School. Chris and Melissa work hard to make all the time they have count with family and others.
I remember coming to a tournament and, just watching him interact with the team and, joking around and just having fun and just talking to them about their lives. And I could tell, he loved what he was doing, and he was passionate about kids and just passionate about people. And that was part of the reason why I fell in love with him, I guess.
When you teach, it's like you're on the front lines. They're just such critical years for a kid, and I feel like public school needs some positive role models. So when I have opportunities to share my faith or what I'm learning in just small ways, not overtly, but just to show that there's something hopefully different about my life, that somebody has changed my life.
Chris spends a lot of time as the head coach of the Penn Manor varsity boys volleyball team. Chris takes this opportunity to teach the boys more than just the game.
Good set. So we started a leadership team within our team. Many of those boys will go with me each year to the Global Leadership Summit. Hopefully it creates a better culture on our team, but it's more as just that they have an opportunity then in the future to lead, that they become better leaders.
The athletic director came to me and said, I just want you to know how much I appreciate your husband. He's like, I see something in your husband that is different from a lot of coaches. He's like, he's not only showing them how to play volleyball, he's showing them how to be a father. He's showing them how to be a husband. He's showing them how to be a man.
I probably learn more through our failures or our losses than I have our wins, but I have also found that they're great opportunities to teach kids just how to do life well.
As a teacher, Chris had a unique opportunity to start a Bible study that meets every Tuesday morning before school. What started small has now grown to over 70 students.
I stole from LCBC like I usually do, and just stole the idea of life groups, and I said, hey, let's connect. I want you to sit in groups that are not just closed, but that you're looking for other kids who have never been here, and I want you to make them feel comfortable. I want you to invite your friends. And I don't know if that was it or if it was just the group of kids, but it exploded. It's just an opportunity really for them just to connect and build relationships that I hope will take them all through high school and maybe into college, because I think that's one of the determining factors of how a kid ends up. I think when they have positive influences around them, I think they go far.
During a regular team meeting, Chris saw another opportunity to step out and start something that would impact the lives of over 100 students.
2 boys at different times of the year that their dad died. And so I asked the question in this team meeting, is there anything set up for these boys, for boys who just don't have a father figure, come from a broken home? The team leader said, no, start something. So I think about 45% of our student body has experienced some kind of setback, who had a dad in prison, who had a mom leave, or separation, death, anything like that. But we just stay after school. Some male teachers give up their time just to encourage these boys. But I've seen such a turnaround with some kids. They'll know that, hey, here's somebody I respect, at least I hope, and they make a change when they come into the classroom.
We all know that the time we have is precious. The Telescos are making the most of theirs by getting out and pouring into the lives of students and families in their community.
You know, he's constantly going, and most of the time, I would say probably 90% of the time, it's creating opportunities for somebody else. And through that, you couple that with his passion for other people, that's what happens. All these Bible studies pop up. So we want to make sure that we're giving 100% of who we are to those few things that we do, so that, it's really working.